Hello and welcome to Sax Comprehensive. My name is Ken Gowdy, and in this video we'll make that transition from playing sheet music to improvisation, creating our own melodies. Now this video is for the complete beginner because we're going to start off small and gradually build up. So we're going to start off improvising with just one note, then looking at two notes, then looking at the triad, then looking at some scales and techniques in order to build out our melody. The first thing that I suggest that you do is that you get a backing track, which is not too complicated with not so many chord changes in it. Now the backing track that I'm going to use for this video is the jazz standard All the Things You Are by Jerome Kern. Now when you get your backing track, you should also try and get the chords listed out so you know which chord is playing and what chord follows which. When you get your backing track and the chords that are written out, make sure that the chords that are written out are appropriate for your instrument. So for instance, if you are playing a concert instrument such as a piano or a guitar, then the names of the chords should be appropriate for that instrument. If you are using a transposing instrument, then the names of the chords written out should be appropriate for that transposing instrument. So for instance, in this backing track, I've got the chords listed out with their concert pitch, so I can use those chords when playing over this backing track with a piano. But if I was to improvise over it with a transposing instrument like an alto saxophone, then I couldn't use those chord names. I would have to use these chord names instead, because these chord names are appropriate for this instrument. The easiest way to get the chord names for your instrument, you could just type it into the internet, type in backing track, the name of the backing track that you want, type in alto sax, and then you'll probably get the backing track with the names of the chords that are appropriate for your particular instrument. Stage one, the first thing that you're going to do, you're going to use the root of the chords that you've got written out, which is appropriate for your instrument, and you're only going to use the roots of those chords when improvising. So for instance, if the chord says C major 7 or C dominant 7 or C diminished 7, you're just going to use the C note to improvise over that chord. The main thing that you're going to try and do is come up with an interesting rhythm to use the root note of those chords with. So how do you do that? Well, suppose you had no clue on how to do it. Well, the first thing that you could do, you could just play quarter notes with the root of the chords, and it would sound something like this. Now that would just be a string of quarter notes, which is not very interesting. So what you could do is then skip out some of those quarter notes, so you're introducing some rest periods, and it would sound something like this. Next, what you could do, you could introduce some triplets in it, and it would sound something like this. The next thing that you could do to make it more interesting is to add some syncopation to the music. So don't start the notes on the beat, also have some notes on the off beat. So use some dotted notes instead. Maybe do not start at the beginning of beat one, come into the music a little later, and have different durations of notes, and maybe even lengthen the rest period in there so it sounds more interesting. So it sounds something like this. So what you should be doing in stage one is coming up with different types of rhythms, experiment with it, try and use different note durations, try and use triplets, try and use syncopation, do not start on the on beat, or start on beat 1, etc., and apply them. Now, if you're having difficulty in coming up with some rhythms out of your mind, then what you can do is use some rhythms from some music that you've heard before, or take it straight from some sheet music. If you look at some sheet music, look at the notes which are played, and take that rhythm and apply it to what we're actually doing here. Stage 2. So now that you're familiar, we've come up with some good rhythms by just using the root of the chord. Now we want to move on to using 2 notes. And the 2 notes that we're going to use are the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. So you're going to have to write out the chord tones of the chord and then just use the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. The 3rd and the 7th are known as guide tones, and they are very important for outlining the chord. So what you're going to do, you're going to start playing the 3rd, and then you're going to end on the 7th of that chord, then move on to the next chord, starting with the 3rd, and then ending on the 7th of the chord. So it sounds something like this. Stage 3, what we're going to do here is play the triad. So we're going to play an arpeggio of the triad. And in order to play the triad, we need to introduce the 5th note of the chord. So far, we've been improvising with the root of the chord. We've been improvising with the 3rd and the 7th of the chord, which are the guide tones. So now we're going to introduce the 5th note so that we can play the triad. The triad is the root, the 3rd and the 5th note of the chord. Now you don't have to play the triad in the root position starting with the root. You could start with the 3rd or you could start with the 5th. It really does depend on where you are in the music and what you're actually looking for. So if you play the arpeggio of the triad, it will sound something like this. When improvising, don't think that you have to create something new all the time. It's perfectly fine to repeat certain sections or phrases or little motives or few notes. So what I'm going to do next is, where I've played this triad, I'm actually going to repeat the triad again, but I'm going to vary it a little bit by changing the note duration. So I'm going to play the triad and I'm going to play the triad again, but change the note duration. I'm also going to use a pickup note to introduce this little phrase that I'm going to do. So it's going to sound something like this. Now in this video, I've given you some ideas how to improvise over a backing track, basically using the 4 notes of the chords. If you look at your backing track and try and work out what is the structure of the music. Now, the structure of the music that I'm using in this video follows an AABA structure, which is very common in standards. The first section is the A section. The next section is also an A section because the chord progressions are the same. The only difference is that it's in a different key. Then you get onto the B section, which is the bridge, which is different. And then it goes back to the A section. So what you could do when you play that first section, you play the melody for that. Then when you come into the next A section, you could just repeat that same melody, obviously transposing it into the next key. Then when you come onto the B section, you're going to have to come up with some new ideas there for improvising over that bridge. And then when you get to the last A section, you can play again the melody which you played at the beginning. And that way you'll be able to play over the whole of the jazz standard. Well, if you haven't done improvisation before, then hopefully in this video you got some ideas to get you started, and there's quite a lot to get through just using the 4 notes of the chord. In the next video, we'll add in some more notes, looking at adding in the 9th, the 11th, the 13th, etc. Looking at some more ideas and concepts to help build out our melody. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, then give it a like as usual and share it with your friends. And hopefully I will see you in the next video where we're going to look at it in more detail. Thanks for watching. I shall see you soon. Bye-bye.